If you own a King KC1401 HD bandsaw like what I do, you've probably wanted to throw it out and replace it with a Rikon or a Laguna for as long as you've owned it. I've had this one 15 years, it's never cut straight. Today I changed all that. What it was doing was so bad I could never use a fence to follow a straight line, to resaw, or even a straight line to rip a board. It would always want to pull the workpiece against the fence or push it away. Nothing I did ever seemed to make any difference until now. Now I'm able to cut 1/8 of an inch veneers with it, and this thing cuts slick. I've used my neighbor's 14-inch Laguna, and he has one of the Resaw King carbide blades for his. That's the only difference that I can tell, is that maybe this one can't make the cut as fast, but I can tell you this thing works great now. I'm not gonna sell it. I'm gonna hang on to it. Stay tuned and I'll show you what I did. The first thing we're gonna do is just start disassembling it. Now, a few of the people on YouTube say take the table off in order to get better access to all your guides. And I think I'm actually going to do that. And I also want to know if this particular model is adjustable when it comes to these trunnions, because I want to be able to rotate the table to get the blade parallel to that binder slot. Yeah, so this is actually able to rotate. There's some larger holes where these 6 screws or bolts go into the cast iron table, so there is some play in this. So you can actually rotate this to do what some of the different people have said on YouTube. So this is going to work pretty good. Okay, let's get this cleaned up a little bit. Tons of sawdust and stuff inside here. Next, let's get these guide blocks out of the way, and we'll also get the rear thrust bearing backed off as well so that it doesn't touch the blade whatsoever. One of the problems I had with my King bandsaw over the years was the bolt that actually holds in the rear thrust bearings on both the top and the bottom stripped out. So I ended up just using a tap and die set to rethread this and put a standard bolt in here. So some of the bolts aren't the same size as others because of that, but I find having a larger bolt in there than what I once did makes it much easier to actually set this up, because I'm not so scared about stripping these threads out anymore. Just got a nylon brush here we'll use to clean off some of the sawdust off this tire on the upper wheel. We'll probably do it on this lower wheel too. One thing I do run into with this bandsaw is this piece right here tends to catch right in this area. So I'm going to mill it out a little bit and just make my life easier in the long run. A little bit of a design flaw there in my opinion. This should make it so it just can't get caught anymore. These don't have to be super tight, just enough that vibrations aren't going to shake them loose. And we'll get this wheel back on. It installs super easy. It's just this one nut that removes it off of this post. And once again, you don't have to have this super tight. It's not holding up the world. Just snug. I primarily use my bandsaw for resawing. I picked up 3 of these little ripper blades from Tough Tooth Bandsaw Blades. They're here in Ontario. I'll leave a link for their company in the description below, but a really great resaw blade. So let's get this unfolded and installed. These new blades are really sharp, so just be careful as you're doing it. And we'll get a bit of tension on it so it goes through all these guides a little bit easier. So when setting up the blade on the tire or the wheel, what you're going to want to do is, according to some of the videos I've seen, you want the base of the gullets in the middle of the wheel. That's where all the tension is, where you're going to be cutting. And that's going to actually allow you to set your guide blocks or your bearings on the sides of the blade just in behind those gullets. and you'll never have to move them again regardless of the width of the blade that you're actually using. Let's get the tension dialed up here, and then we can get it running in the proper place on the wheel. Roughly a 1/4 inch of deflection is what you're going to want on that blade in the middle here. Spin the wheel, and let's get the blade tracking so the bottom of the gullets are in the middle of the tire. So I still want to move that blade a little more to the right, so I'm turning the adjustment knob clockwise on the back of the bandsaw. Yeah, that's about as close as I can probably get it to riding in the middle. So just to show you, this is how it is on the bottom one. It's quite forward, and then on the top wheel, it's actually quite towards the rear of the actual tire. It doesn't really matter where it rides on this bottom tire or wheel. It's going to be in a different location. That's just the way all bandsaws are, so don't worry about that. The main thing is that your teeth aren't going to ride on the metal part of the wheel, that they're just riding on the rubber. And in fact, on the bottom wheel, the blade is tracking more towards the front, which means the set on the teeth is going to be in mid-air all the way around the wheel, and you're not going to actually change the set. So that's going to help the blade continue over time to track very straight through your wood as you're resawing. If you were to run that on the wheel in such a way that the gullets are actually going to be on the tire, then you risk compressing the gullets and maybe having different sets on one side versus the other of the blade, and it'll make your cuts wander one way or the other. Now on this bandsaw, when you loosen this knob to raise and lower the guide, there's actually a flat spot on the back of this rod. So that ensures that this rod always rotates to the same angle every time you tighten this. So because of that, you want to make sure that you actually set this particular screw here in a way that makes this guide run so that the blade will run parallel through it. And what this is going to do is ensure that the guide blocks can have a lot of surface area or a lot of contact with the side of the blade. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to tighten that right there. Next, we'll get these thrust bearings back in that control the movement of the blade front to back. You don't want this actually quite touching the blade. You want it just out ever so slightly so that when you engage the wood, it'll just start to touch it. Yeah, that's pretty good because it just has ever so slightly a bit of space in there, so it's not going to quite engage it until you push against it with some wood. So that's good. So we'll lock that one in place there. Sometimes they move when you tighten them in to their positions, so just check it and make sure that seems pretty good. Next up will be the top one. Yeah, there's like a sheet of paper in that, so I'm going to leave it like that. Probably the best I can do. The lower guide blocks are really easy to set. You just want the blocks to just come up against the blade, and you want them so that they'll be just in behind the gullets as well. You don't want to catch any of the teeth whatsoever. So I think I want to move this whole apparatus back just a tiny bit. Okay, that's got the blocks set up at the right distance from where the gullets are. Now we'll just get them set up against the blade. Very close, but not quite touching. And basically the same thing for these top ones. The next thing I want to do is just reinstall the guards and turn the saw on so I can make sure that it's running properly before we do the full reassembly. Okay, it's running pretty good, so let's get this table back on. Since we've got the blade installed already, we're going to have to feed it through the table here. So let's set the table so it's nice and perpendicular to the blade, and I actually think I've got that set up really well from in the past, so I'm going to leave that as is. In order to get the table or the miter slot parallel to the blade, I set a stainless steel ruler right on the blade, but in between two teeth, so it's centered on a gullet, and tried to get it set up as parallel to the blade as I possibly could. Then just holding the ruler in place, I measured using this part of the calipers on the ruler and on the outside edge of the miter slot, and getting that measurement the same on both ends, tightening the table down with the trunnions underneath of it, now I know I've got the miter slot parallel to the blade. You're also going to want to make sure that the fence is parallel to the miter slot. So lock your fence in place and simply measure from the fence over to the miter slot at both ends. And mine is only off by about 1/10 of a millimeter approximately. So the set on the teeth of the blade are going to take care of that really small imperfection, and it's going to be pretty tough to fiddle with it to get it closer than that. But if you have to change the angle of the fence, you can change the settings on the screws here, loosen them off, get it set, lock them in place, and you'll be able to get it nice and parallel to the miter slot. But I'm gonna leave mine as is. All right, one of the final things to do is to get the scale set up properly. So I've got the fence right up against the blade, so I know I'm at 0 or theoretical 0, but it's not quite in the right place, and I can't move the bubble finder to get that to 0 out properly. So we'll just loosen off the actual fence from the table, or the rail, I guess, from the table here, and we'll move it over until we've got it right on the 0 spot here. I think that looks pretty good. As close as I'm ever going to need it. I'm mainly using this bandsaw for resawing, not doing any super precision, but I'm very, very close to the 0 mark there. Okay, I'm going to do a test cut. I'm going to see if I can actually cut a 1/8 of an inch veneer or strip off of this scrap piece of red oak here. This bandsaw has never been able to do that, never straight with a fence. So let's see if it'll actually pull it off. Okay, so I think that's a success. This saw cuts nice, thin veneers. That's 1/8 of an inch, and it's very consistent. It's not wedging or angling whatsoever. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm quite surprised that this saw is capable of doing it, but that just goes to show you, you tune up your bandsaw, have a sharp blade, you can cut some thin strips. It doesn't matter about the quality of your saw. I know this saw is a lower end saw, nothing against the King company. I have a lot of their machines, but they tend to be on the more budget priced end of things. But yeah, I was thinking about replacing this thing, but for what? Am I going to be able to do better than that? Leave me a comment down below and let me know if you can actually do better than this with your Laguna or your Raycon or whatever saw you've got, Grizzly, 14 inch. Until next time, go build something beautiful.